Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. And then Pilate asks, what is truth? What's the irony in that?
Welcome, fellow travelers, to the Good Book Club. We ask good questions to keep the conversation of God alive. And yeah, we're doing John what today?
John 18, which is a great chapter actually. It's right after the time Jesus did that long prayer in chapter 17, and they crossed the Kidron Valley. This is verse 1. And there was a garden where he and his disciples went. They actually went there often. And that's how Judas knew he was going there, because how did Judas show up? What was his entrance?
Was his entrance bongs and stuff and loud noise? No, it wasn't that.
What was it?
No, it was with soldiers, right? Soldiers with lanterns and torches. And maybe some pikes and stuff. I don't know.
They had weapons.
They had weapons.
Most likely a spear or a sword.
One of the many.
And it was ironic because the people living in darkness showed up with torches.
And then Jesus also says that he's the lamp to your road or something.
The light of the world.
Light of the world, but isn't there also somewhere else where it references that he's the lamp?
Psalm 119 talks about thy word is a lamp unto my feet. And we are a city upon the hill. So he's obviously the light itself, but it's just ironic that the people not living in the light in Jesus showed up with lanterns and torches. And from here on out, this is where a lot of things are happening. Like the last four chapters were just a bunch of dialogue. Now it's so many actions going on. And they ask him and Jesus, he knows everything. And he asks, who is it that you want? And they say, Jesus of Nazareth. And he says, I am he. And when he said it, they stepped back and fell down.
And how long was it?
I honestly want to know. Because it doesn't say how long they were on the ground. It could have been 10 minutes or a minute, maybe longer. I don't know.
The whole night?
Probably not likely the whole night.
No.
But why do you think they fell?
Because of... It's actually a good question. I don't know, but what I might get to is because just the power of the name of God.
Definitely.
So there's just... Yeah, so it's almost like God's power just pouring onto them, of like not bow or kneel, but it's just so overwhelming.
Exactly, because he said I am, which is one of God's powerful names, his personal name, which we are actually getting to in Exodus chapter 3. And I am who I am is one of God's awesome names. It's one of my favorites, and he says I am he, another I am statement, and it's so powerful that they fall
all
on the
in
ground.
Caps. I am he.
Yeah. So that was such a cool moment, and it's possibly the people got slain in the spirit. Have you heard that phrase before?
I've heard it once. What does it mean?
So there's another example in Revelation at the beginning, and I think in Ezekiel, where you're overwhelmed with God's presence, where you physically fall down, but then he speaks to you in the spirit. And it's happened to me before where there's a church service and then the people pray for you and you fall, and then somebody catches you, and then the Lord speaks to you, but you're overwhelmed by his presence, and then you fall to the ground. And it's happened to John in the book of Revelation, when he saw this revelation of Jesus and he fell down as if he was dead, and eventually did get back up again. And it happened to Ezekiel as well.
Sure.
So they might have been slain in the spirit, or just, I believe, as you said, overwhelmed by his name.
You said you experienced it.
Yeah.
Correct? Do you remember anything from that?
I can't remember what exactly was said, but it was a strange experience where I feel God's presence and it's overwhelming, obviously in a good way. Then you fall over and then he talks to you and he comforts you. And I wish I can remember what he said. I just remember I felt a lot of peace as he was talking to me.
Okay.
Yeah. So that might have happened here with them as well. And it doesn't say, and they got up. Literally just the next sentence says, again he asked them, Who do you want? Who is it that you were looking for? Jesus of Nazareth, they said. And then he says, I told you that I am he. If you are looking for me, then let these men go so that he can protect his disciples. He said that a bit earlier. But then Simon Peter comes, and what does he do? Do you remember? What does Peter do?
Does something that will leave evidence.
Evidence of what?
I'm trying to hold myself in. Okay. So he cuts off someone's ear,
Okay.
a soldier's ear, and then Jesus goes and, I like to say, unvan Gogh the person. Well, so he just took a sword or a dagger, I don't know what weapon, but he took it, chopped the person's ear off. And what's the reason for doing that we're speculated around about?
So yesterday when we talked about it, we later in the chapter, Jesus talks to Pilate, where he says that my kingdom is not of this world. If it was so, my servants would have fought so that I won't get arrested. And then Peter was actually fighting so that Jesus won't get arrested. So clearly, Peter did not understand what Jesus was saying, because he cut off Malchus. He cut off his ear. That was a servant of the high priest, so it was a big deal. And when Jesus put it back, he removed the evidence of a criminal offense. And then obviously that was the last healing Jesus did before being crucified. And Peter wanted to protect the Messiah, but he didn't understand what Jesus meant by he needs to die by crucifixion. And he's been saying it a few times actually.
A lot lately.
A lot. And Peter didn't understand it. And this kind of can make you frustrated, and you're thinking, come on, Peter, you spent time with Jesus, you should know this. But this is dramatic irony. We know more than what he knew back then, and this creates tension in the story. I learned this in script writing, and I love how this chapter is written, because we're going to get into how it cross cuts in my mind. I'll explain that now. But he did use a sword, and he tried to protect the Messiah, but he misunderstood what the assignment of Jesus was. Because after that, Jesus does get arrested, which is ironic, because Jesus never did anything wrong.
He didn't do anything wrong, but apparently he did towards or for the jealous people. Not jealous, but also...
I think they had some jealousy. He was more famous than them.
Yeah.
And it's ironic. John actually uses a lot of irony, but especially in this chapter.
Okay.
So he gets arrested, and they take him to Annas. It says here in verse 24, then Annas sent... Wait, sorry. I'm jumping around. Let me just get it here again. Right, so he gets arrested, and they take him away. And then we get to Peter's first denial. And it says Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Who was this another disciple? Who's that?
The another disciple is, we said, John, or maybe Nicodemus.
Yes. Who do you think it is? What's your opinion?
My history knowledge isn't that great, so it's more like a guesstimation. Nicodemus feels more correct, but John sounds right because John wrote this.
Okay. Why Nicodemus?
I don't know.
Because what I discovered yesterday is that some people think it's Nicodemus, because it explains how the other disciple got access to the temple court because he knew someone working there. I always thought it was John, because he likes to refer to himself as the disciple whom Jesus loves. And then I thought, oh, this is another way of referring to himself. He doesn't write in first person. He likes referring to himself as the third person. You know, in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Terry says, Terry whatever. He refers to himself in the third person. And this is what John likes to do as well. I think it's John, but some people think it's Nicodemus. But anyway, Peter does go to a fire because it's cold, and somebody asks him if he knows Jesus, and he says, I am not. And he denies him the first time. Which is a great parallel to when Jesus said, I am he. that he's
I am he,
Jesus.
and then I am not. It's just like whiplash, whoop. Okay.
And the cool thing is when they ask him, "Are you his disciple?" says, "I am not," and it's this positive, negative thing. So I really
So
like.
there's contrast taking place.
I love the contrast, the contours of this story,
Sure.
where it says Jesus accepts what is about to happen, as difficult as it is, and then Peter denies it. And there's a thing that I just remember that I wanted to talk about, where Jesus, where is it here? Let me just find it. It says in verse 11, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?" I forgot to mention that part. Do you know what he means by that?
Not really.
So when it talks about drinking a cup from God, it often refers to the wrath of God. So in one of the Old Testament prophets, I can't remember which one, but it was a Bible Project video about it. Then they explained how a cup of wine is sometimes symbolized as God's wrath, and Jesus was willing to drink that cup. It was a metaphor, because what happened on the cross was the day of the Lord, one of the days of the Lord, and that was God's wrath poured upon Jesus on the cross, and he was willing to drink that heavy cup of wrath. God took out his wrath on Jesus on the cross. That's why we do not have condemnation. That's what Jesus was talking about.
Sure.
Cool. It's interesting, eh?
It's very interesting because Jesus decided now he's going to take on God for all of us.
That's exactly what he did.
Sure.
And from here on out, it cross-cuts again. So if you are a filmmaker like me, when you watch a sitcom, for example, or a action movie where it goes to this scene and then to that scene, and it gives you the idea that these events are taking place at the same time, this chapter is written so well. I see it as cross-cutting. And from here, it cross-cuts to the high priest questions Jesus about what he spoke about. And Jesus says, I always spoke out in the public. You can ask any one of them what I taught. And then somebody slaps Jesus and says, how dare you speak to the high priest like that? And it's ironic. Why is it ironic?
Because Jesus is the highest or the ultimate priest.
Exactly. He's the ultimate high priest. And they think the other guy, he was a high priest, but saying, how dare you speak to the high priest like that, they just slapped the ultimate high priest in his face. There's another use of irony.
Yeah.
And it creates tension because then we think, ooh, not a good move.
No.
And Jesus says here in verse 22, is this the way you answer the... Jesus says in verse 23, if I said something wrong, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? And they had no response. It just says, then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Oh, that was the other thing. I forgot to mention this yesterday. They weren't allowed to have two high priests at the same time.
Interesting.
Because Annas and Caiaphas, who is father-in-law and son-in-law, they weren't allowed to have two high priests at the same time. So they didn't have integrity. It was corrupt.
Sure.
I forgot to mention that yesterday.
Technically, there are three.
Technically, yeah, I see what you mean. But humanly speaking, there should have only been one.
Sure.
So that was the other thing that they did wrong. And from here, cross cuts again back to Peter.
Okay.
So now it's again exterior, campfire, night, continuous. And they asked Peter, aren't you one of his disciples? And he says, I am not, second denial. And then verse 26, one of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked him, didn't I see you in the garden? And Peter finally denies it a third time. And at that moment, a rooster began to crow.
Sure.
According to one of the other Gospels, I think it's Luke, it says that he went out and cried bitterly.
I would think so because at the Last Supper he believed no, he's not going to, and then Jesus, no, you will deny me 3 times and the rooster will crow, and it actually happened. So it's him realizing what he has done right there and then.
Because Peter's story is actually so relatable. where he's on fire for God. I'm not going to deny you. And then Jesus says, no, you are. And then he actually denies him 3 times. He cries bitterly about it. And then later when we get to chapters 20 and 21, we see how God restores him. And in the book of Acts, we see how God uses him. And I believe a lot of us can relate to that, where we promise God we won't do something, we won't do that sin, and then we fall back into it, and you feel bitter about it, but then the Lord still comes, and he can still restore you. That's what makes Peter such a good character in the Bible, because he's so authentically broken, but God can so authentically restore him.
Yes. Is very relatable.
Exactly. So he's one of my top favorites. And he wrote 2 letters as well.
Okay.
Yeah. From here on, it cross-cuts back to Jesus before Pilate. Who was Pilate?
Pilate, he's the guy that flies the plane.
I knew you were going to make a Pilate joke. No, this is spelled a bit differently. Pilate.
Oh, it's
Not Pilates. No.
Oh, I was about to go to the next joke. Pilate, he was basically the man who had control over life and death.
How?
By saying you will be crucified or you have done nothing wrong. You can be set free.
So he was a Roman governor.
Roman governor.
So he did have authority to do that, but we'll get to that actually very soon enough. So from here on, Jesus is taken to the Roman governor, and then he asks, what charges are you bringing against this man? And they said, if he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you. They didn't really answer his question.
No.
And you must pay good attention how they are manipulating him in this chapter.
It's almost doing like how Jesus does, but but the wrong way. Because they're using it for bad. Because Jesus answered with a question. Here they
didn't answer with a question.
Nah, they did not.
But it's so vague. It's kind of frustrating.
So it's a yes or a no answer, and then there's this long sentence that they put out. It's supposed to be a 2-letter word, not 20 words.
And you might pick up that Pilate may have been frustrated because he says, take him yourself and judge him by your own law. And they say, we have no right to execute anyone.
Wrong.
According to their law. Why is it wrong? According to their law, they say, according to our law, we can't execute anyone.
They're allowed to stone people to death.
Exactly.
They did want to stone Jesus, but he slipped away.
They wanted to do that twice.
Okay.
We have proof.
Okay, so they lied right there again, and Pilate didn't have enough knowledge to actually know that they're talking gibberish. Nah, gibberish is a little bit
nonsense.
Yeah, they're not talking about truth. But that brings us to the next part, right? The truth.
That's actually not yet, but almost there.
Okay, almost there.
Guys. From here, they actually lied about that part. They were gaslighting him. They did have right to execute people through stoning, but it was right that Jesus had to be crucified because this took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Verse 32. John chapter 3, we said that the Son of Man must be lifted up. Just like the snake was lifted up in the desert, he had to be lifted up on the cross, not through stoning. It was meant to be. So even though they were gaslighting him about in our law we can't execute anyone,
they're still fulfilling the prophecy.
He had to die by crucifixion. And from here, he asked Jesus, are you the king of the Jews? And wait, where is it? Pilate then went back inside Pilate's cell, and Jesus asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And then Jesus asks, is that your own idea, or did others talk to you about me? And then he sarcastically says, am I a Jew? I believe that was sarcasm. Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it that you have done? And he says, my kingdom is not of this world. If it was, my servants would have fought to protect me or prevent me from getting arrested. But now my kingdom is from another place. He says, oh, so you are a king. And Jesus answers, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And then Pilate asks, "What is truth?" What's the irony in that?
That he's talking to truth.
Because what did Jesus say 4 chapters ago?
He's the way, the truth, and the life.
He was speaking to truth himself.
Mm.
So when he asks, "What is truth?" I always find it so ironic. He's standing right there. You're looking at truth. And then he walks away before Jesus answers, because it says, "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this he went out again to the Jews. Verse 38. Then he says, "I find no guilt in this man, but it is your custom for me to release one of your prisoners at the time of Passover." I'm actually not sure why that's a custom.
I think Pilate, it was a rhetorical question because straight after that he said he doesn't find any fault in this man.
What do you mean?
So what is truth? Rhetorical question. Because he didn't let Jesus answer him. Because rhetorical questions is, you know, the answer.
I wonder what would have happened if Jesus said, "I am the truth." And then what would Pilate have said?
Don't know.
I honestly don't know. But from here, he asks, "Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Do you know the meaning of Barabbas?
Son of a man.
Son of a father.
A father.
And it's ironic, again, because Barabbas, his name means a son of a father, and Jesus, his name means Savior, but Jesus is the son of the Father, who is God.
Father.
And that's also a very good contrast and parallel between the two characters. And it's why do you think John ends this chapter with the sentence, "Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising"?
I don't know.
So an uprising was obviously a rebellion against the Roman Empire. The Romans were dominating the Jewish people. They wanted to overthrow the Romans. They wanted a political messiah. We discovered that earlier in John. And to be part of a rebellion, go against the Caesar, go against the Roman Empire, would have meant that you're worthy enough to be crucified. Barabbas should have been crucified. And that's where chapter 18 ends.
Sure. And someone mentioned that figuratively that we are Barabbas because Jesus went and died in his place. And Jesus went and died in our place. So we are Barabbas.
Because I heard someone say, "Oh, it's so unfair that Jesus got crucified, he didn't do anything wrong, and Barabbas, a criminal, got away." And there was a video of Judas Smith, we'll link it in the description, where he says, "But then he realized he's Barabbas, he deserves to die." And that's what Jesus does. Even though we deserve it, he still took our place.
Sure.
Incredible. I've heard this story so many times, and it still does something to me, hearing it again and again. Wow. That's chapter 18.
Yeah, chapter 18, and next up, chapter 19. See you in the next episode. Share, like, subscribe, leave a comment if you have any questions or just want to say what you found from this insightful. Yeah. All right.
Cheers.
Cheerio.